She showed up with nothing but a dusty dress, a busted lip, and a mouth that didn't tremble. Said she needed shelter just for the night. He almost shut the door in her face. Almost. But then she leaned in, her eyes sharp as flint. I have a tight oven and you a loaded gun. I can give you what you want. He didn't ask what she meant. He knew. A man living alone on 1,000 acres of dust and regret knows exactly what a woman like that means. He just stepped aside and locked the door behind her. A heavy, final sound, the sound of a deal being struck in the devil's own twilight. The sun was a merciless anvil in the Arizona sky of 1872. It beat down on Blanche Delroy as she stumbled toward the lone, weathered silhouette of Jasper Beckett's ranch. Dust, thick and red as dried blood, clung to her tattered dress, caking her boots and coating her throat. Every step was an agony, a testament to the miles she'd walked, the dangers she'd fled. At 26, her face, though still beautiful, bore the faint, indelible tracery of recent violence. A fading bruise on her temple, a nervous flicker in her otherwise defiant blue eyes. Her platinum blonde hair, usually meticulously styled, was a tangled mess streaked with grit. She was a woman on the run, desperate, but beneath the desperation, a formidable current of sharp intelligence pulsed, a survival instinct as keen as any predator's. The ranch house, a squat, sturdy structure of rough-hewn timber, sat isolated in a desolate expanse, surrounded by little more than a few outbuildings and the vast, indifferent landscape. No welcoming smoke curled from its chimney. No sound of life reached her until she was almost upon it. As she neared the porch, the screen door creaked open, and a man emerged. Jasper Beckett. At 37, he was a monument to solitude and hardship. His frame was lean, muscular, honed by years of back-breaking labor under the same unforgiving sun. His face, etched with lines that spoke of sorrow and stoicism, was framed by dark, perpetually unkempt hair and a heavy, brooding brow. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, were weary, distant, and held a deep-seated pain he'd long since buried beneath layers of indifference. He wore simple, worn ranch clothes, and his hands, calloused and strong, rested loosely on the worn leather of his belt. He looked at Blanche not with curiosity, but with the immediate, almost instinctive repulsion of a wild animal sensing a threat. "This ain't no stagecoach stop, ma'am." Jasper's voice was a low growl, rough as sandpaper. "And it sure ain't a hotel." He didn't move, didn't offer help, simply stood like a sentinel of his isolated domain, daring her to trespass further. Blanche stopped a respectful distance from the porch steps, her lungs burning, her vision blurring at the edges. She raised a hand, not in supplication, but in a gesture of weary truce. "I'm not looking for a room, Mr. Beckett," she said. Her voice, though hoarse, carried a surprising steel. "I'm looking for a proposition." She saw the flicker of annoyance, then a flicker of something else, intrigue in his eyes. She pressed on, her gaze unwavering, assessing him, reading the unspoken needs of a man who had clearly given up on life beyond survival. "I need shelter," she stated, her words slow and deliberate. "And you, Mr. Beckett, need an heir." Jasper's jaw tightened. The words hung in the arid air between them. Audacious. Unexpected. He scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. "An heir? What in God's name would make you think a solitary man like me needs anything of the sort?" "The silence of this place," Blanche countered, her eyes sweeping over the desolate landscape. "The way you stand guard over it like a king without a kingdom. You've buried your past, but you haven't buried your future. And a man like you, with land like this, needs a legacy. Someone to carry on the name, to keep this ranch from crumbling into dust when you're gone." She took a shallow breath, the dust rasping in her throat. "I can give you what you want, what you need, even if you don't admit it." His eyes narrowed, scrutinizing her, trying to decipher the layers beneath her desperate plea. He saw the marks of a hard life, yes, but also a fierce, untamed spirit. Her audacity was breathtaking. "And what makes you think you're the one to provide such a service?" His tone was laced with skepticism, a challenge. Blanche met his gaze unflinching. "I am intelligent, I am resourceful, and I am capable of bearing children." More importantly, she leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper, though it still carried. "I am desperate enough to make this work, and you, Mr. Beckett, are desperate enough to consider it." It wasn't a plea. It was a negotiation, a cold, calculated offer that laid bare the raw, transactional nature of survival. The air crackled with unspoken implications. Jasper stared at her for a long moment, the arid wind whistling past his ears. He had sworn off love, sworn off attachment, buried his heart deeper than any grave. But the notion of an heir, of leaving something behind, had been a phantom thought in the darkest corners of his mind, a silent ache he refused to acknowledge. And this woman, this bruised, defiant stranger, had seen it, called it out. He didn't know if it was madness or genius. He knew only that her offer, however preposterous, had struck a chord in a place he thought long dead. Finally, he exhaled a long, ragged breath. "Come inside," he grunted, turning abruptly and stepping back into the dim interior of his home. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command, an acceptance laced with reluctance and a heavy dose of suspicion. Blanche knew, even then, that she had won a battle, but the war was far from over. She followed him, stepping from the blinding glare of the sun into the cool, silent gloom of the ranch house, a place that felt both like a sanctuary and a cage. The first few days were a strange, silent ballet of avoidance. Jasper kept to his routines, rising before dawn, tending to his cattle, mending fences, his broad back often turned to her. He spoke only when necessary, his words clipped, devoid of warmth. He watched her from the corner of his eye, this strange woman who had bargained her way into his life. He was a man who trusted nothing and no one, least of all a woman with a story she wasn't telling. Blanche, for her part, tried to make herself indispensable. She cleaned the small, dusty house with a fierce energy, scrubbing away years of grime, airing out rooms that smelled of stale air and loneliness. She cooked simple, hearty meals, surprising him with her unexpected skill in the kitchen. She mended torn shirts, patched worn trousers, and even one afternoon managed to coax a wilting patch of herbs in the small, neglected garden back to life. Every task was performed with a quiet determination, a silent declaration of her worth beyond the audacious proposal. She observed Jasper, his habits, his moods, the way his jaw would clench when he was deep in thought, the almost imperceptible softening around his eyes when he looked at the distant mountains at sunset. One night, long after she thought he was asleep, she saw the glow of his lantern in the barn. She crept to the window, peering through the grimy glass. He was sitting on a hay bale, staring at a small, faded photograph. A woman with a gentle smile and kind eyes. His late wife, Sarah. The way he traced the edge of the photo with a calloused thumb spoke of a grief so profound it had hollowed him out. Blanche felt a pang of something she couldn't name. Pity? No, it was a cold knot of understanding. This was the ghost she had to contend with, a memory she had to overcome. The next day, while cleaning Jasper's room, she found his sparse belongings in a small wooden chest at the foot of his bed. A few worn books, a spare set of clothes, and a small leather pouch. Her fingers hesitated, then, driven by a need to understand the man she was bound to, she opened it. Inside was not another picture, but a single polished riverstone. Smooth and gray, it felt cool in her palm. It meant something. Everything in this house of silence meant something. But what? She placed it back, her mind racing. This man was a fortress, and she had to find a way inside, not just for her survival, but for the bargain they had made. A week into their arrangement, Jasper came in from the fields earlier than usual, a storm brewing on the horizon and in his eyes. He dropped a heavy burlap sack on the kitchen table. "Town supplies," he grunted, avoiding her gaze. Later, as she was putting away the flour and beans, she found her own meager bundle of belongings sitting by the back door, where she'd left it. It was untouched, a silent testament to his suspicion. He hadn't even looked inside. Or so she thought. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The wind howled outside, a lonely, mournful sound. She felt a draft and rose to check the door. As she passed the main room, she saw him by the dying embers of the fire. In his hand was the single item of value she possessed, something she had tucked deep inside her bundle. A man's ring, solid gold with a small, dark stone. It wasn't flashy, but it was expensive. It was the one thing she hadn't sold, the one thing she couldn't. He didn't look at her, just turned the ring over and over in his fingers. "This from the man who gave you that busted lip?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Blanche froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. The lie came easily, practiced and smooth. "Yes, my husband. He's dead now." Jasper looked up then, his eyes boring into hers, searching for the truth. He saw the flicker of fear, the carefully constructed mask of a victim. He didn't believe her, not for a second. He could smell a lie the way he could smell rain on the wind. But he didn't call her on it. He simply placed the ring on the mantelpiece, just out of her reach. "A reminder," he said, his voice flat, "of the kind of trouble that follows some people." He stood and walked to his room, leaving her alone in the flickering firelight, the unspoken accusation hanging in the air between them. The ring sat on the mantel, a silent witness to a story far more complicated than the one she had told. The game had just changed. He was watching her, waiting for her to slip up. And Blanche knew with a chilling certainty that her sanctuary was also her prison. The tension in the house grew thick and palpable. It wove itself into the fabric of their days, an undeniable current of awareness that flowed between them, despite their best efforts to ignore it. The air in the small house seemed to hum with it. A silent question, a burgeoning desire that neither dared to acknowledge, let alone name. He would catch her gaze across the rough-hewn table, or see her silhouetted against the open doorway as she swept the porch, and a muscle in his jaw would tick. She would watch his powerful hands as he mended a saddle, the focused intensity in his eyes, and feel a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. One sweltering afternoon, the well pump broke. It was an old, stubborn piece of machinery, and Jasper wrestled with it for hours, his frustration mounting with every failed attempt. He was covered in sweat and grease, cursing under his breath. Blanche watched from the porch, a glass of cool water in her hand. Finally, she stepped down. "Let me see," she said, her voice calm. He grunted, stepping aside with a look that dared her to succeed where he had failed. She studied the mechanism for a long moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. She wasn't just a pretty face with a sad story. Her father had been a tinkerer, a man who could fix anything, and he had taught her well. She pointed to a small, corroded pin. "There. That's stuck. If you can knock it loose, the lever should engage." Jasper stared at the pin, then back at her, a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes. He took a hammer and a small chisel, and with a few sharp taps the pin broke free. He worked the handle, and with a groan and a screech, water gushed forth. He said nothing, but as he washed the grease from his hands, he splashed some of the cool water on her arm. It wasn't an accident. It was a touch, fleeting but deliberate, a crack in the fortress wall. That night the heat was suffocating. The air was still and heavy, promising a storm that refused to break. Neither of them could sleep. Blanche lay in her small room, the thin cotton sheet sticking to her skin. She could hear Jasper pacing in the main room, a restless energy radiating from him. She knew what he was thinking about. The same thing she was. The bargain. The unspoken part of their deal that hung over them like a guillotine. Finally, she could bear it no longer. She rose and walked into the main room. He was standing by the open window, staring out at the moonless night. He turned as she entered, his eyes dark and unreadable in the gloom. "You can't sleep either," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Too hot," he rasped, but they both knew it wasn't the heat. She walked towards him slowly, deliberately. The air crackled. The silence was a living thing. "The nights are long, Jasper." Her voice was a low murmur, a silken thread in the darkness. "And we have a deal to keep." He didn't move as she came to stand before him, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. She reached up, her hand cool against his stubbled jaw. His skin was rough, his breath hitched. He was a man starved of touch, of warmth, of life. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the war between his suspicion and his loneliness. "I'm not her, Jasper," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm not Sarah, but I'm here, and I can give you what you need." The mention of his dead wife's name was a gamble, a desperate, cruel move. But it worked. The pain in his eyes sharpened, then was consumed by something else, something raw and primal. He grabbed her then, his hands hard on her arms. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He pulled her towards his room, his grip unforgiving. This wasn't tenderness. It was a raw, desperate claiming, a fulfillment of a contract written in dust and desperation. He pushed her back onto his bed, the bed he had once shared with Sarah, and the shadows in the room swallowed them whole. There was no gentleness, no courtship, only the brutal collision of two lonely, damaged people. A storm of flesh and need, their bodies moving in a frantic, almost violent rhythm. It was a release of all the tension, the suspicion, the unspoken desire that had been building for weeks. When it was over, they lay in silence, not touching, the space between them as vast as the desert outside. Jasper turned away from her, his back a rigid wall of regret. Blanche lay awake, staring at the ceiling, a single tear tracing a path down her temple. She had gotten what she wanted. She had sealed the bargain. But as she listened to the sound of his ragged breathing, a cold realization washed over her. She hadn't just bargained for an heir. She had bargained away a piece of herself, and she wasn't sure she could ever get it back. The fortress was breached, but the man inside was more lost than ever. The days that followed were worse than the silence before. Now there was a new, awkward weight between them. The memory of that night was a ghost that haunted every shared meal, every glance across the room. Jasper became even more withdrawn, his eyes holding a new layer of guilt and suspicion. He worked from sunup to sundown, pushing himself to the point of exhaustion, as if he could physically outrun the memory of what he had done. He had betrayed the memory of his wife. And for what? A woman he didn't trust, a bargain that felt more like a curse. Blanche felt the shift keenly. The tentative connection they had started to build was gone, replaced by a cold, hard wall. She continued her duties, her movements precise and mechanical, her face an unreadable mask. But inside, a quiet desperation grew. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. But the nights were the hardest. He no longer slept in his room, choosing instead a rough blanket on the floor by the hearth, as far away from her as he could get. The large bed felt cavernous and cold. She had won the battle but was losing the war. She needed more than his body. She needed his protection, his trust, and she had no idea how to get it. The isolation of the ranch began to press in on her. Days bled into weeks with no one to talk to but a man who looked at her with a mixture of desire and disgust. She needed a break, a glimpse of the outside world. "I need to go to town," she announced one morning, her voice firm. "For supplies, thread, some salt." It was a flimsy excuse, but she had to get away. Jasper looked up from his coffee, his eyes narrowed. "I go to town." "You need to mend the fence on the north pasture," she countered coolly. "It'll be faster if I go." She held his gaze, a silent challenge. She wouldn't be his prisoner. After a long, tense moment, he gave a curt nod. "Take the wagon, and be back before dark." The unspoken warning was clear. Don't try to run. The town of Willow Creek was little more than a dusty main street lined with a handful of weathered buildings. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a sheriff's office. It was a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. As Blanche tied the wagon, she felt the stairs. Eyes followed her as she walked towards the general store, whispers fluttering in her wake like moths. They saw her swollen belly, now impossible to hide, and drew their own conclusions. The reclusive Jasper Beckett had taken in a woman, and now she was carrying his child. It was a scandal, a juicy piece of gossip in their otherwise monotonous lives. Inside the store, the air was thick with the smell of pickles and sawdust. The proprietor, a stout woman with hair pulled back in a severe bun, gave her a look that could curdle milk. Blanche ignored them all, moving through the store with a calm determination, gathering her items. As she stood at the counter counting out Jasper's coins, a man stepped up beside her. He was older, with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat, "forgive me for staring, but you look awfully familiar. You wouldn't be one of the Miller girls from over in Blackstone County? Eleanor Miller?" Blanche's blood ran cold. She forced a polite, distant smile. "I'm afraid you have me mistaken for someone else," she said, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. "My name is Delroy, Blanche Delroy." "Delroy, you say?" The man frowned, studying her face. "Strange. You're the spitting image of her." "Poor girl. Had a terrible run of luck, she did." He shook his head sadly and moved away. Blanche quickly paid for her things, her hands trembling slightly. She fled the store, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She practically ran to the wagon, her mind racing. Miller. Eleanor Miller. A name from a past she had buried deep, a past that was supposed to be dead. How could he know that name? Blackstone County was hundreds of miles away. It had to be a coincidence, a trick of the light. But as she urged the horses back towards the ranch, a cold dread settled in her stomach. The world was not as big as she had hoped, and her past had a much longer reach than she had ever imagined. She drove the wagon hard, the wheels kicking up a cloud of dust behind her. She needed the sanctuary of the ranch, the isolation that had once felt like a prison. When she finally saw the familiar silhouette of the house on the horizon, a wave of relief washed over her. But it was short-lived. As she got closer, she saw him. Jasper. He was standing on the porch, his arms crossed, his face a thundercloud. He had been waiting for her. He had seen the way she had raced back, the panic in her eyes. He knew something had happened. As she pulled the wagon to a halt, he walked towards her, his movements stiff with anger. "What happened in town?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "Nothing," she lied, her voice tight. "Just got my things and came back." "Don't lie to me, Blanche," he snarled, his eyes blazing. "I saw you. You looked like you'd seen a ghost." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Who did you see? Who knows you?" The old fear, the one she thought she had left behind, rose up in her throat, choking her. For a moment he looked just like Raymond, the same possessive rage, the same brutal strength. She flinched away from him, a strangled cry escaping her lips. The reaction was instinctive, a reflex born of past trauma. And it was all the confirmation Jasper needed. He saw the genuine terror in her eyes, and his grip slackened. The anger in his face was replaced by a flicker of confusion and something else, something that looked almost like pain. He had become the thing she was running from. He released her, taking a step back as if she had burned him. He said nothing more, just turned and walked away, towards the barn, leaving her standing by the wagon, trembling. The wall between them was now higher than ever, built not just of suspicion and guilt, but of his own violence and her terrifying past, a past that was no longer buried. It was alive, and it was coming for her. That night the sky ripped open. Not a gentle rain, but a furious deluge, as if the heavens themselves wept in anguish. Thunder cracked, rattling the very foundations of the sturdy farmhouse, and lightning illuminated the drenched landscape in blinding flashes. Jasper, accustomed to nature's power, found a different kind of tempest in the air that night. He was in the kitchen, stoking the dying embers of the hearth, when a flick of movement caught his eye through the rain-streaked window. He swore under his breath. Blanche. She stood beneath the relentless downpour, her thin nightgown plastered to her form, revealing every curve, revealing the pronounced swell of their child. Her hair, usually meticulously pinned, was now a wet and wild halo around her face. She wasn't seeking shelter. She was embracing the storm. Her head was tilted back, eyes closed, a ghost in the chaos. A strange mix of vulnerability and defiant wildness radiated from her, pulling at something deep within Jasper. He strode to the back door, yanking it open. The wind howled, spraying cold water into the kitchen. "Blanche, what in God's name are you doing out here?" His voice was rough, a mix of concern and irritation. She slowly opened her eyes, their green depths reflecting the distant lightning. A slow, knowing smile touched her lips. A challenge. She walked towards him, her bare feet squishing in the mud, each step deliberate, her form outlined by the dim light from the door. Water streamed from her, forming puddles on the warm floors as she stepped inside, bringing the chill of the storm with her. "What does it look like, Jasper?" Her voice was almost a whisper against the storm's roar, yet it cut through the din. "I'm letting the rain wash away the dust of this place, and perhaps the dust of my own past." She paused, her gaze locking onto his, intense and unblinking. "Don't you feel it? The anger? Don't tempt me, Blanche." His hands clenched at his sides. "You play a dangerous game." She took another step closer, her wet body almost brushing his. The scent of rain, damp earth, and something uniquely her own filled the air. "Or are you simply afraid to play at all, afraid to admit that what you feel for me isn't just duty?" Her eyes dropped to his mouth, then back up, daring him. "You look at me, Jasper. I feel it. You want me. But your ranch, your solitude, your damned principles," he seethed. "You know nothing about my principles." "I know you're a man who denies himself," she whispered, provocative and laced with a truth that stung. "A man who lets fear dictate his desires. Tell me, rancher, what are you so afraid of? Losing control? Or perhaps feeling something real again?" The words hit him like a physical blow. Fear, cowardice. A red haze began to cloud his vision. This woman, with her sharp tongue and her defiant gaze, was chipping away at his carefully constructed walls. His initial protective instinct against her reckless vulnerability began to morph, twisting into something far more potent, a primal hunger, caged for years. He reached out, his hand closing around her wrist, his grip hard, almost bruising. "You want to play with fire, Blanche. Let's see if you can handle the burn." He pulled her, not gently, but with a fierce urgency that brooked no argument. She stumbled, her eyes wide, but there was no fear in them, only a fierce anticipation. He dragged her to the heavy, scarred kitchen table. The rain continued to beat against the windows, a wild accompaniment to the tempest brewing between them. With a powerful sweep of his arm, he cleared the table of the few dishes that remained, sending them clattering to the floor. He pushed her back against the sturdy wood. Her wet nightgown offered no resistance as he tore at the fabric, his fingers clumsy with a desperate need. The thin cotton ripped, exposing the pale skin beneath, sleek with water. Her breath hitched, but her eyes never left his, a silent challenge and an unspoken invitation. What began as a punitive impulse, a desire to silence her provocative words, swiftly became an act of unbridled passion. There was no gentleness, no courtship, only the brutality of two bodies driven by a storm of their own making. Their mouths met in a desperate clash of teeth and tongues, tasting of rain and hunger. His hands roamed over her, rough and possessive, molding her against the hard surface of the table, skin on skin, sleek with water and burgeoning sweat. A furious dance, a forging of new chains. The fury inspired surrender, her body arching into his, her nails digging into his shoulders. When it was over, the storm outside began to recede, leaving behind the heavy, dripping silence. They lay intertwined on the table, their bodies still humming with the aftershocks of their encounter. The air was squeezed with the scent of damp earth, passion, and a quiet, profound shift. Jasper, feeling the pull, away from the rage, looked at her. Her eyes were still wide, her lips swollen, her hair a tangled mess around her face. He saw no regret there, only a deep, unsettling understanding. He reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face, his touch surprisingly gentle. From that night on, the ranch changed. Jasper no longer slept alone in his vast, empty bed. Blanche, too, found her routine altered. The kitchen table, once a place of meals, now held the memory of a wild fusion. They never spoke of what had transpired, but the silence between them was charged with a new dynamic. Something profound and irreversible had united them in the heart of a storm. A silent promise whispered between their deepest desires. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm, as steady and predictable as the sun's arc over the plains. Spring bloomed in a riot of color, but inside the Beckett Ranch, life took on a quiet, almost domestic hue. Their interactions remained largely unspoken, a language of shared glances, quiet gestures. He would leave firewood stacked by the stove without being asked. She would ensure his coffee was hot when he came in from the fields. It was a partnership forged in necessity, yet it was deepening into something more tender, more profound than either had anticipated. One crisp morning, Blanche awoke with a queasy stomach, a sensation that had become a persistent companion. She found a steaming mug of warm milk on her bedside table, a silent offering from Jasper. He had noticed her subtle pallor, the way she sometimes pressed a hand to her stomach. He said nothing, but his actions spoke volumes. As the days stretched into weeks, the evidence became undeniable. Blanche Delroy was with child. The news, unspoken within the ranch house, traveled swiftly on the wind through the dusty streets of Willow Creek. Whispers blossomed in the general store, around the saloon's swinging doors, and among the women gathered at the church social. That Delroy woman, they'd murmur, their eyes darting towards the Beckett Ranch, carrying Jasper's child, before a proper wedding, before a proper mourning period for poor Sarah. The gossip escalated, fueled by curiosity and a rigid sense of propriety. Some questioned Blanche's mysterious past. Others condemned Jasper, accusing him of disrespecting the memory of his deceased wife. The pressure, a palpable weight of judgment, began to press down on Jasper. He felt the cold stares, the hushed conversations that ceased abruptly when he entered a room. He was a man accustomed to solitude, but this public scrutiny, this judgment of Blanche, stirred a rare anger within him. One evening, Jasper found Blanche sitting on the porch swing, gazing at the darkening horizon. The faint swell of her belly was visible beneath her simple dress. He sat beside her, the wood creaking under his weight. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, his voice rougher than usual, he broke it. "Blanche," he began, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "The town talks. They want to know about your past, about where you came from, about Eleanor Miller." Blanche flinched, her hands tightening in her lap. The calm facade she had meticulously maintained for months began to crack. She took a deep, shaky breath, the words catching in her throat before tumbling out, raw and painful. "My name is not Blanche Delroy. It's Abigail Miller. And I wasn't married to Raymond Delroy. He was my brother." Jasper turned to stare at her, his face a mask of confusion. "Your brother?" "He wasn't a good man," she whispered, tears tracing paths down her cheeks. "He was possessive, violent. After our parents died, he thought he owned me. He said I was his property, his to do with as he pleased. The last time, I thought he would kill me. I ran. I took what little money we had and I ran. I changed my name. I just needed to disappear, to be safe." She looked at him then, her eyes pleading for understanding, for belief. "I never meant to bring trouble to your door, Jasper. I just needed to survive." Jasper listened, his jaw tight, his eyes never leaving her face. The raw honesty of her confession, the vulnerability she rarely showed, hit him with the force of a physical blow. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently covering hers. "You're safe here, Abigail," he said, his voice low and firm, a promise etched in stone. He used her real name, a quiet acceptance of her truth. "No one will touch you, not while you're under my roof, not while I draw breath." He squeezed her hand. A silent vow of protection, a bond forged in shared pain and an unspoken future. For a moment, a fragile peace settled over them, a sense of belonging in the vast, unforgiving land. But peace, like a fleeting desert bloom, was destined to be short-lived. The very rumors that had forced her confession had also carried across the plains, reaching the ears of the man she had so desperately fled. The distant thud of hooves, growing steadily louder, shattered the evening's tranquility. Abigail's head snapped up, her eyes wide with terror. A dark figure on horseback emerged from the twilight, riding hard towards the ranch. His silhouette was unmistakable, etched into her deepest nightmares. Raymond. He reined in his horse with a brutal jerk, dust swirling around him like a malevolent cloud. His eyes, burning with a chilling possessiveness, fixed on Abigail. "There you are, my love," he snarled, his voice a whip crack in the still air. But his words weren't for her. His gaze swept over Jasper, a predatory glint in his eyes. "I've come to take what's mine." He dismounted, but he wasn't alone. Behind him rode another man, a silver star glinting on his chest. Sheriff Clay Maddox. Jasper's blood ran cold. He stepped forward, placing himself between Raymond and Abigail, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle leaning against the porch post. "She's not yours, Raymond." Jasper's voice was a low growl. Raymond laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, but she is, my runaway wife, and a thief." He gestured crudely towards Abigail's belly. "And carrying your bastard, I see. It doesn't matter. The law is on my side." He turned to the sheriff. "I have the marriage certificate, Sheriff, and I'm pressing charges. She stole my inheritance." Sheriff Maddox dismounted slowly, his face impassive. He didn't look at Abigail. He looked at Jasper. "Jasper, the man has a legal claim. This is a domestic dispute, and a matter of theft. My hands are tied." It was a lie. Jasper could see it in the sheriff's shifty eyes. Maddox was corrupt. Raymond had bought him. There would be no help, no justice, just the cold, hard letter of a law that served the powerful. "Get your things, Blanche," Raymond sneered, using her false name like a weapon. "We're going home." A primal roar tore from Jasper's throat. The rifle was in his hands in an instant, its barrel pointing directly at Raymond's chest. "Get off my land," Jasper snarled, his eyes blazing with a dangerous fire. "You'd shoot an unarmed man in front of the law?" Raymond taunted, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "He's not unarmed," a voice cut through the tension. Abigail. She stood on the porch, no longer trembling. In her hand was Jasper's small, silver-plated derringer, which she had taken from his bedside table weeks ago. It was pointed steady at Sheriff Maddox. "And you're not the law," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound strength. "You're a paid dog." The sheriff's eyes widened in shock. The standoff was absolute, a tense, deadly triangle under the dying sun. Raymond, seeing his advantage crumble, lunged, not at Jasper, but at Abigail, a desperate, animalistic charge. But Jasper was faster. He met him head-on. The porch exploded into a maelstrom of fists and grunts. Wood splintered underfoot as the two men crashed into each other. Jasper fought with a cold, protective fury, each blow calculated. He was defending not just his home, but a future. He saw Abigail, her face pale but resolute, the gun still trained on the frozen sheriff. A surge of primal instinct coursed through him. Raymond stumbled, and Jasper delivered a decisive blow to his jaw, a strike that sent him sprawling onto the dusty ground. At the same moment, a shot rang out. Not from Jasper's rifle, from the derringer. Abigail hadn't shot the sheriff. She had aimed for the sky, a deliberate, sharp crack that echoed across the valley. It wasn't a threat. It was a signal. Hooves thundered in the distance, not one horse, but a dozen. They came over the rise, a posse of riders, grim-faced ranchers from the neighboring properties. Men who knew Jasper. Men who respected him. Men who had heard the rumors and seen the corrupt sheriff for what he was. They had been waiting, watching. The gunshot was the sign they had agreed upon with Jasper earlier that day. Sheriff Maddox saw the riders, saw the hard set of their jaws, and the rifles they carried. He looked at Raymond, dazed on the ground, then at Jasper, standing over him like an avenging angel. The law had failed, but the community had not. The sheriff slowly raised his hands. The fight was over. Months later, the Beckett Ranch hummed with a different kind of life. Raymond Delroy, or rather Miller, and the disgraced ex-sheriff were long gone, run out of the county on a rail. The lies had been burned away, leaving only the hard, unvarnished truth. Inside the warm, lamplit house, Jasper sat by the hearth, a tiny bundle cradled in his strong arms. His son. A boy, strong and healthy, with a shock of dark hair and Abigail's defiant blue eyes. Abigail watched him, a soft, content smile gracing her lips. The journey had been long, fraught with danger and despair. But looking at Jasper, her Jasper, holding their child, she knew she had not just survived. She had thrived. She had found a home, a protector, and a love deeper than she had ever dared to imagine. Her hand, once scarred by the violence of her past, now gently caressed the soft blanket around her son. Jasper looked up, catching her gaze. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. It was a smile Abigail had rarely seen, a testament to the pain he had carried. But now it was full of a profound joy, a lightness that seemed to lift years from his shoulders. He held out the baby to her, his eyes shining. "He's perfect, Abigail. Our boy." The town, once a hotbed of whispers and judgment, had watched the events unfold. They had seen Jasper's unwavering protection, Abigail's quiet strength, and the new life blossoming on the Beckett Ranch. Slowly, with an unspoken respect, they had come to accept them. Abigail, the woman who had survived, was no longer an outsider. She was Jasper Beckett's wife and the mother of his son. Jasper, holding his son close, finally understood. The ranch, the land, the cattle, they were his legacy, yes. But the true inheritance wasn't the dirt beneath his boots. It was the name he had given his son, the family they had built, the future they would forge together. He had found a reason to smile again, a reason to live beyond mere survival. The lonely rancher had found his purpose, his joy, in the embrace of a love he had sworn to deny, and in the promise of a new dawn. This tale of Abigail and Jasper paints a vivid picture of a time when survival was a daily battle, and justice was often something you had to make for yourself. It makes us wonder, in a world where every choice is a gamble, and shadows from yesterday constantly threaten to engulf tomorrow, how far would you go to protect the life you've built? What defines justice when the law itself is for sale? We'd love to hear your thoughts. What resonated most with you in this raw and untamed story? Share your reflections in the comments below. And if you're drawn to stories of resilience, unexpected connections, and the untamed spirit of the Old West, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our journey into these forgotten corners of history. Until next time, stay vigilant